Hey everyone, it's Chris. I've been looking at the 2024 rules and damage capabilities of various classes so that I can compare them to each other. And in my last video, I started to look at Warlocks and we looked at Eldritch Blast. And I first kind of took a look at my base build and saw how, some changes at later levels could impact the damage at those levels. And then I did an optimized build where we took a subclass and we saw just how much we can boost those numbers if we are actually optimizing the build rather than just casting Hex. So I did those numbers, and what I found is that Eldritch Blast is still probably not keeping up with weapons. The 2024 rules did a lot to make weapons better, and it didn't do anything to make Eldritch Blast better. And so Eldritch Blast used to be fairly comparable to weapon use, and now it's worse. Still okay. I mean, it depends what you want to do with your character. But if what you want to do with your character is the most damage, Eldritch Blast isn't what I would recommend. That said, there's other ways to deliver damage with the Warlock. Now, I looked at a True Strike build in my last video as well, where we just focused on one really big attack and we could add our Charisma modifier several times. And that actually performed better than I thought it would. Though still, not that much better than Eldritch Blast. In fact, very comparable to Eldritch Blast. Today, I want to look at the more obvious one. And the obvious one is Pact of the Blade. Pact of the Blade got improved in 2024. We can now make up to 3 attacks with it. And the question is, how good is the damage if we do that? And so that's what I want to look at today. And as always, if you have not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. I'm pushing for 100,000. Look how close I am. Your subscription would really be great. So if you would be willing to do that, I'd appreciate it. All right, a quick edit here. I forgot to mention that I was led to a Reddit post from Sailor Nash, who has put together the DPRs for the various builds I've done. I don't know if it's going to continually be updated or not, but I thought I would share it. I asked permission. He said, go ahead. So down here, we have a graph that has all my builds that I've done DPRs for so far, charted level by level, and you can compare them all to each other. And it's very easy to look at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin a comment with a link to this. So if you want to check it out for yourself, I'm not going to analyze it right now, but if you want to check it out for yourself, feel free. Okay, back to the video. Now let's look at some numbers, and hey, check out the new shirt. Let's kill some monsters with Warlock math. All right, I'm going to start with a base build, and there's a couple things I make sure to do with a base build. The first thing is I do not select a subclass. I also do not select a species. I might select an origin feat, and I certainly look at our normal background ability score increases, and I only do a straight class build. Gotta say, Pact of the Blade looks really challenging to do with a straight class build. You really want a 1-level dip at first level for armor and shield and all that kind of stuff, and without it, this was tough to make. But anyway, let's take a look. So here's the ability scores I ended up with. I'm going to be doing a 13 strength despite focusing on charisma, simply because to use heavy weapons, you need a 13 strength or you can have disadvantage. I don't want disadvantage. So I didn't worry about intelligence and wisdom. One of them would be a 9, one of them would be an 8. Doesn't matter which. The feats, this is what I considered. I figured tough, which you could get if you were a human or through a custom background. Otherwise, if you want to increase charisma and get the tough feat and you're only using the 2024 backgrounds, you cannot do it. But I assume a lot of tables are going to use older backgrounds. I assume a lot of tables will allow customization of backgrounds. If it was available, I'd want tough, because defensively, this character is going to be not great. Okay, just keep in mind, what was our dexterity? 14 dexterity, and we're going to be wearing light armor. So that's rough, right? And no shield spell. Very rough, very rough. We're going to get Warcaster at level 4, gets our Charisma to 18. Charisma plus 2 at level 8 is Charisma 20. And then we're going to get armor. We'll get moderately armored at 12 and heavily armored at 16. By that time, our strength will be 15. That's what you need to be able to wear plate armor without a movement penalty. So eventually our armor class would be okay. And then I took Boon of Combat Prowess at level 19. That's the one that if you miss, you can turn it into a hit once on your turn. Or I think it's once on any turn, actually. And yeah, so that's what the feats would look like. And like I said, this would be a rough character because you're starting out and you're wearing, I guess, studded leather with a 14 dexterity. So that's what, a 14 armor class, no shield, no special defenses, not great hit points. And you're rushing into melee. So that is rough. I don't see a way to get around it. Like, I looked at it. So this would be a tough character. Like, I would not get attached to this character. I'll tell you that. Assumptions. So we're going to do 4 combats per long rest, 4 rounds per combat, 1 short rest in the middle. I'm going to say that Hex can be placed for all combats. And that's an assumption. You could lose concentration, run out of spell slots. But I'm going to assume for the purposes of these calculations that we were using Hex. And I just wrote here, this character is unavoidably fragile, but I'm going to assume they're remaining conscious. Otherwise, damage is 0. And if you're dead, your damage is 0 too. Invocations. Of course, I'd take Armor of Shadows at level 1. That at least gets our armor class up to 15, which still isn't great. Then at level 2, we take Pact of the Blade, and Fiendish Vigor will give us a few temporary hit points. Then level 5, we're going to get Eldritch Smite and Thirsting Blade. That Thirsting Blade is extra attack for your Pact weapon. 7, we get Otherworldly Leap, which is very good. Level 9, we get Life Drinker. That's going to give us a d6 extra damage on our turn with one of our hits, and technically give us a little bit of healing. At level 12, Gaze of Two Minds is good, and I would switch Armor of Shadows because at this point we're going to be able to wear at least medium armor. And Devouring Blade is your 3rd attack. Level 15, Witch Sight, and level 18, Visions of Distant Realms. These are just invocations I might take if I was playing this character. These are not damage invocations. And the base build, I'm basically going to make it very similar to the way I made my Eldritch Blast build, where we're going to use Hex, and we're going to use Foresight at 17th level. And the math will be up on your screen. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we go from 6.3 to 8.6 to 9.2. Big jump at level 5 to 21.1 when we get Thirsting Blade. And I'm assuming we're using Eldritch Smite when we can. So we're using one of our pack slots on Hex, and whatever we have left over, we're going to do Eldritch Smites. If you wanted to do something else, you could, but for the for simplicity's sake, Eldritch Smite is just an easy way to determine what kind of damage you might get if you expend spell slots for damage. And we can see right here how much damage it is. So if you weren't using Eldritch Smite, just remove that from the damage. Then we go to 21.8, 23, 26.9 once we get Life Drinker, to 30.9, and then we stay at 41 for quite a while. So when we get our 3rd attack, we jump up to 41, and then it just kind of stays at 41 for a long time. Then we get a big jump at 17 when we get Foresight, and then we are going to go up to 58.4. And once we get our Epic Boon feat, we go to 64.8. Okay? So let's take a look at it on a graph and compare it to the base Eldritch Blast build. All right, up on your screen is the damage at all 20 levels, and the lower line is Eldritch Blast. So the difference from the previous Eldritch Blast I used is this one is using Foresight at level 17 and an Epic Boon at level 19 that increases damage, which is why we see the big spike starting at level 17. And this is kind of how the new Eldritch Blast base looks. And the higher line is Pact of the Blade. And looks like in Tier 1, there's very little difference, though Pact of the Blade is doing a little bit more. In Tier 2, there's a bigger gap, and Pact of the Blade is doing a fair bit more. Tier 3, for most of Tier 3, except for level 11, because we get our 3rd attack later with Pact of the Blade than we do with Eldritch Blast. But once we get past level 11, there is a huge gap between the two. At this point, Pact of the Blade just does way more damage than Eldritch Blast. And then in Tier 4, it's closer again. And that's because Eldritch Blast is giving us a 4th attack and the Pact of the Blade never does. We're capped out at 3 attacks. Nevertheless, the 3 attacks outdamage the 4 attacks from Eldritch Blast by still a decent amount, though it's significantly less than it was in Tier 3. What this tells me is Pact of the Blade is a better way to deliver damage than Eldritch Blast if damage is your main concern. And I should mention this because, in these videos, I'm looking at damage because damage is something I can calculate with math. That doesn't mean that damage is the most important part of your build. It might be. That's up to you. But it's part of your build if damage is part of what you do, and I just happen to be focusing on that one aspect in these videos because I can measure it. All right? So let's see how much higher we can get it with a little bit of optimization. So let's take a look. And again, this is going to be a build that I might actually make rather than one where I'm just trying to squeeze every point of damage I can. So I wanted to look at this 2 different ways because there's 2 different ways we could go. First, we can focus on Charisma because Pact of the Blade allows us to use our Charisma for attacks and damage. The issue with going Charisma is I want feats that don't increase Charisma. They increase Strength. And so I'm increasing the ability score I didn't want to increase in order to focus on Charisma. And so I do think you have less potential with a Charisma build for damage, but I want to take a look and see what the damage is for it, and then take a look, what if we didn't focus on Charisma and we did focus on Strength? What would that look like? So I'm just going to show both of them to you. Obviously, there's value to having Charisma over Strength beyond just damage, so it's up to you to decide. Like in these calculations, I'm assuming we're using Eldritch Smite. You might use those pack slots for something else, and if you do, and there's a saving throw or an attack roll involved, you would probably want to be Charisma focused, not Strength focused, right? Anyway, I'm going to select this subclass, the Fiend subclass. Why would I select Fiend? Not for damage. Fiend doesn't really give you anything for damage. But what Fiend does is it's going to give us a bunch of temporary hit points when we take out creatures. And for a character that wants more defense, that's great. It's going to improve our saving throws, and we don't really have any other way to improve our saving throws. So that's very good too. So I just think Fiend is probably the way I'd go based on, just the 2024 rules. If I can access old rules, Hexblade is still a good choice. Just because you wouldn't necessarily even need to multi-class if you went Hexblade. And for background, the same. Progression will be different. So with optimized build, I allow myself to dip into different classes. So I'm suggesting 1 level in Paladin, then 19 levels in Warlock. And what that will do is it'll allow us to wear medium armor, and, that is going to just give us a better armor class. So there's our ability scores. They're the same. And there's the feat. What I would suggest now is, since we're going to have a little more defense through the Fiend Pact, in terms of getting temporary hit points, rather than getting tough, I think I would try to get Magic Initiate Wizard so I could get the shield spell. Also, by dipping Paladin, I'm going to have a couple first level slots that I could use to cast shield. And then with 1 free casting, that'd be 3 castings per long rest. That's not too bad. Then Warcaster at level 5, everything's going to be a level down because we dipped, right? So that gets us our Charisma to 18. Then at level 9, we get it to 20. Then at 13th level, we'll get Great Weapon Master, and our strength is going to start going up. Then at level 17, we're going to get a strength up to 15, and we'll take Heavy Armor Master. That's another defensive feat, so it's not going to help our DPR, but now we can wear plate armor, and we're going to absorb some of the damage we take, so that'll be good. And then Boon of Combat Prowess. So mostly the optimization has not been damage related. Most of the optimization has been defense related because I want these characters to be a character that I might play. And just the initial one was way too weak on defense. So I kind of really focused on that. Same assumptions. And with Great Weapon Master, we get a bonus action attack sometimes. And what I'm calculating is bonus action attack for crits, but not on round 1, because on round 1, we're going to be laying down a hex spell, which means our bonus action will not be available. So if we score a crit, it's too bad. We've already used our bonus action. So in order to account for that, I will multiply that damage by 0.75. showing that it's available for 3 out of 4 rounds. Here's the invocations I would take. Not too much different, mostly the same. I get tough anyway through Lessons of the first one later on. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, it should look very similar to the previous one. Relevant spells. So because we are dipping another class, that means at level 5 we will not yet have extra attack. So at level 5, use True Strike. Get a d6 at least, right? And we're using our charisma for attack and damage anyway, so it won't change the damage number. It'll just give us an extra d6. So I'd use True Strike at level 5, and then at level 6 I'd probably switch it out for another cantrip. And we go from, so level 1 sucks, okay, because we're not strength based, and we're a paladin, and, we're using a weapon. And, honestly, I'd probably take something like the Bless spell and just hang back, cast Bless, and not do much else. But I'm calculating damage from 1 through 20. So here it is, 4.9. It's terrible at level 1. So as I'm editing this, I realized that if we did take Magic Initiate Wizard with our level 1 Origin feat, we could get True Strike and have it Charisma based. So we could use our Charisma for our level 1 damage, and that's what I'd do. It didn't occur to me when I did these calculations, but it's just the level 1 damage, so I didn't figure it was worth going back and making any changes. So just keep that in mind when you look at it. Once we get to level 2, then we're doing fine. We're up to 9.8, 9.3. It goes down a little bit at 4, and the reason is because our ability score increase is a level behind. So at level 4 and level 8, we're going to feel that a little bit. So that's why we have a slight decline at 4. 13.1, then 24.3, then 24.0 at 8, same thing, right? Then 27, 30.9, 34.9, 57.1, 58.9, 78.1, that's pretty good, and then 84.9. So it actually ends up fairly strong. So let's take a look at it on the graph, and I'm going to compare it to the optimized Eldritch Blast damage. So here they are. The blue line represents Eldritch Blast, and the red line represents Blade Pact. And they crisscross all the time here. So I can't really say that one's above the other. If we look at Tier 1, at levels 2 and 3, Blade Pact is slightly ahead, and at levels 1 and 4, it is slightly behind. But they're very, very close. Then in Tier 2, at level 5, the Eldritch Blast is ahead. Why is it ahead? Because we're making a second attack, and I dipped Paladin, so that's got our extra attack with Blade Pact a level behind. Once we get it, then we're ahead with Blade Pact. That brings us to level 11, and once again, we're getting our third Eldritch Blast, but we're still stuck with 2 attacks, so Eldritch Blast comes out ahead again at 11 and 12. Then at 13, once we get our third attack with Blade Pact, now there's a big gap, like really big. How big? Let's see, 39 to 57, that big, all right? And it stays very, very big until we get to level 17 and we get our fourth Eldritch Blast. Then the damage is virtually identical. And once we get to level 18, then Blade Pact comes out ahead again. So what I'm seeing is for the second half or so of Tier 2 and Tier 4, Blade Pact is way ahead. For the rest of the time, kind of goes back and forth. Most of Tier 2, Blade Pact is ahead. Overall, I would say Blade Pact has probably the better results here. That said, it's better than Eldritch Blast. How does it compare to a weapon user? And we're using a great sword, and we are a spellcaster. Let's compare it to the Paladin. All right, so I did the Vengeance Paladin greatsword build. Let's compare Blade Pact to Vengeance Paladin. All right, so here they are. Vengeance Paladin is blue. Blade Pact is red. Tier 1, as it happens, Blade Pact ends up well behind, of course, because that one level dip is tough for us. At level 2, we actually end up slightly ahead, and then we fall behind again. Then at level 5, it's disastrous. So we go from 13 to 32. So more than double, close to 3 times as much damage if you're a Paladin. Once we get our extra attack, we close the gap, but it's still significant. 24 to 32. 24 to 33, 24 to 35. Okay. This one's big, 30 to 49. Then, once we get our third attack, we pull out ahead of the paladin. Slightly. And slightly here. About 5 points of damage in each case. And then at level 15, we fall behind the paladin again. This is when the paladin is, Vengeance Paladin at least, is getting some reaction attacks. And so they pull ahead of us. We catch up once we cast a Foresight spell. In fact, we pull ahead by about 8 points, it looks. Fall behind at level 19, and then ahead at level 20. If we're looking at a level 20 character, Blade Pact actually out-damages Paladin if you're using a greatsword with the builds I presented. For the rest of the time, Paladin is out-damaging it most of the time. There is a little bit of an exception right here, 13 and 14. But most of the time, Paladin is pretty comfortably out-damaging Pact of the Blade. And the Paladin was fairly average in terms of optimized damage. So the Pact of the Blade isn't looking fantastic here. I will take one that had a little bit lower. This is comparing it to a Berserker with a longsword. All right, so the Berserker longsword is the blue line, and the red line is Blade Pact. And starting at level 13, so right here, Blade Pact, once we get our third attack, is ahead, and it stays ahead right to level 20. Before level 13, like right to level 12, the Berserker with a longsword and shield outdamages Blade Pact with a greatsword, which is quite the difference, right? Like 9.3 with a greatsword at level 4 versus 18.2 with a longsword at level 4. So that's how much behind Blade Pact is. A fair bit. It's a fair bit behind at these lower levels. Once we get that third attack going, it's another matter entirely. But until we do, we are behind the marshals. And that's using all our packs. Like with the Paladin, I actually assumed we were only using half our slots on damage. Here I'm assuming all our slots, though we could question whether Eldritch Smite is the best way to deliver damage. Certainly on the chart, if you want higher damage, you would use Summoning. Summoning requires a lot of assumptions, though. Eldritch Smite, at least I know that's the damage you would do. So yeah, I'd like to avoid excess assumptions when I can. But it does look like, unless we find something else to do with our pack slots, we're not keeping up with damage with other weapon users. That said, I'm not sure this is disastrous. So, we're level 8, and I'm doing 24, and he's doing 30. That's okay. I can live with that. So it really depends. And I did a lot of things for defense here. I don't see a lot of opportunities with the 2024 subclasses to deliver additional damage. So I thought, what would I probably focus on instead? Probably defense. So that doesn't show on this chart either. And remember, this Berserker is reckless attacking all the time. So, although it wears a shield, everybody has advantage to hit it. They don't have advantage to hit this guy. So I think this is still a playable build. And I just don't think, if I wanted to do the most damage I could, probably not the build I'd play. All right? So that's that. What I did want to look at, though, is what if I focus on strength? What kind of difference does that make? So let's take a look. So now we're going to do a strength optimized build. Otherwise, it's very much the same as the charisma build. What I've done here is strength 17, charisma 13. We're going to need the 13 charisma just to multi-class. And then the big change is I'm going to take Great Weapon Master at level 5 instead of at level 13. Level 13, I'll take Heavy Armor Master, and then at level 17, I'll take Resilient Con. I'll get my Constitution up to 16. That's nice. Doesn't affect damage, but it's nice. And assumptions are going to be the same. Here's the invocations, and they are going to be the same as the charisma build. All right. The one thing that's different here is I'm not going to bother with True Strike at level 5 because I'd be using a 13 for attack and damage instead of a 17 or an 18, actually. And so True Strike would actually do less damage than a regular attack. And what we end up with is 7.6, 9.8, down to 9.3, same reason. 12.9, 28.6, 27.8, 31.7, 35.6, 39.6, 57.1, and 58.9, 78.1, and 84.9. It ends up in the same place as if we focused on charisma. The question is, what kind of difference does it make in the middle? So let's take a look. Okay, so this is just comparing the charisma build and the strength build. And for a lot of levels, they are identical. We are going to see a difference at level 1, of course, because when we dip Paladin, it's a lot better to have a 17 strength than to have a 13 strength. So that's what we see there. At level 6, we see a significant difference as well. I should note that at level 5, the damage is almost the same, even though we don't use True Strike, just because we have Great Weapon Master, so it makes up the difference, I guess. But at level 6, we see the difference. So from level 6 through level 12, if we focus on strength, we will have increased damage. So that's what that tells me, is that if I want to focus on tier 2 damage, strength pays off. Any other tier probably doesn't matter. But in tier 2, it is going to make a difference. And how much of a difference? Let's take a look. We're going like from 30.9 to 35.6. 24 to 28. Looks like, 4 or 5 points of damage each round by going strength first. Tier 2 sees a lot of play, so this might really matter to you. But if you're not playing tier 2, if you're playing tier 3, I wouldn't worry about it. I'd do the charisma. And I should mention that, you might want to actually do Eldritch Blast and Pact of the Blade, which you can do. It prevents you taking some of the other utility nice invocations, but you can afford Agonizing Blast and Repelling Blast, as well as the Blade Pact feats. And so you could have the red line for damage, the lower line, and have Eldritch Blast to fall back on if you want to do ranged or want to do pushing, right? So it really depends on your priorities. But if you want to do the most damage in tier 2, then you want to focus on strength, not on charisma. And at the other levels, it's about the same. Okay? Except level 1. And yeah, I mean, I tend not to worry too much about level 1. That's just personal. But anyway, that's what they look like. Let's see how the strength build compares. We'll compare it to that Berserker again and see if it looks any different. All right, so up on your screen, blue is the Blade Pact and red is the Berserker. Of course, in tier 1, just as before, the Berserker does a lot more damage. At level 5, it does a ton more damage, 12.9 to 28.5. But look at this. At level 6, they're basically equal. I think there's 0.1 difference, which is nothing, right? Level 7, they're basically equal. Level 8, the Berserker pulls a little bit ahead, but, less than 3 points. And it doesn't look like... Yeah, the Berserker never really builds up a big lead over Blade Pact, focused on strength, with the exceptions of the low levels. 3, 4, and 5. Does a lot more at those levels. Then it's very close, and then a slight lead, and then the Blade Pact takes a big lead at level 13 onwards. Now, again, this is not a Berserker with a Greatsword. Berserker with a Greatsword is going to look... It's the highest damage I've done so far. It's not going to make the blue line look very good. Okay? I'll just say that. But if this is a build you wanted to play and you wanted something a little stronger on defense than going straight Blade Pact, I think this is a very playable build. When it comes to damage, I can't say the Warlock is one of the higher damage dealers. It is one of the lower damage dealers I've looked at so far. Probably still better off than the Ranger in Tier 3. But, what about Tier 2? Let's take a look. This is compared to the Fey Wanderer build that I presented a few videos ago. The Fey Wanderer is red. Pact of the Blade is blue. Looks like at Tier 2, they're very, very comparable. And it's not until Tier 3, of course, that Blade Pact pulls out way ahead, because that's when the Ranger has a tough time. But in Tier 2, where the Ranger was actually doing decent damage, Blade Pact is doing very similar damage. It does a lot less in Tier 1. It's on the weaker side for damage, but not bad. And that's a bit of a surprise. I thought Blade Pact might be a contender for top damage. It's not. It's not a contender for top damage. Currently the top damage I've done is Barbarian. Berserker Barbarian showing the highest damage overall. The Fighter is runner up. Definitely better damage at high levels than the Berserker, but quite a bit lower at lower levels. But yeah, the Blade Pact Warlock does okay, but it's not going to be one of your highest damage dealers in the game. Now, I should mention again that if we were to throw summoning on here, and I should mention this Fey Wanderer build uses summoning. If I was to put summoning on the Warlock, these numbers might look a little different because summoning tends to look good on these graphs partially because of the assumptions I make. I assume that we can precast it. Maybe I shouldn't. You can't always precast. I assume we can maintain concentration. Maybe I shouldn't. We can't always maintain concentration. But I make those assumptions and it makes the numbers look good on the graph. So, in fact, the Blade Pact Warlock probably is going to do more damage than the Fey Wanderer in Tier 2. Anyway, I figured I'd look at that. I hadn't actually looked at this before. I just thought about it as I was talking. And that is the Warlock. So, what should be next? I think it should be the Druid. Specifically, I want to look at a Moon Druid build and see how it compares in terms of numbers. Now, I know that we haven't got the 2024 Monster Manual yet, and so some of the stat blocks are going to change. But it's going to be months before we get the Monster Manual, and I'm in campaigns right now where people are playing Moon Druids. How are they going to do in terms of damage? Let's find out. So that'll be my next video, and until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.